Welcome back to Once Upon Yesterday, where we dust off the history books. I'm your host, James, and today we're diving into one of history's most binge-worthy plotlines, the rise and fall of empires. Empires are kind of like rock bands. They start small, maybe just a few members, with a lot of ambition. They work their way up, play bigger venues, hit the charts, and suddenly they're on top of the world. But give it enough time, and the cracks start to show. Creative differences, too much touring, maybe a disastrous experimental album. Before you know it, they're doing reunion tours for nostalgia. The difference is, when empires break up, they don't just fade into the background. They leave behind roads, walls, languages, laws, and sometimes a trail of bad blood that lasts centuries. Rome left aqueducts. The British left railways. And cricket, which is somehow still confusing to half the world. The Mongols? They left behind the largest land trade network the planet had ever seen, and an entire Wikipedia page of "You won't believe Genghis Khan's descendants." So today, we're going to explore how empires rise, why they fall, and whether we are living in a new age of empires right now without realizing it. We'll look at ancient heavy hitters like Rome, lightning-fast powers like the Mongols, the globe-spanning British, and then turn our gaze to modern superpowers, some of which don't even own land but still wield influence across the planet. So, what exactly is an empire? Before we start tossing around names like Rome, Mongols, or British Empire, we need to agree on what we're talking about. An empire is not just a big country. Canada is big. Russia is big. But an empire is more than size. It's political control over multiple regions or peoples, usually with a centralized authority. Think one capital city making decisions for faraway provinces. If modern countries are like local coffee shops, empires are Starbucks. You walk into one in New York, one in London, one in Tokyo, and they all feel suspiciously the same. That's imperial influence. But there's another key element: expansion. Empires grow by conquering, absorbing, or otherwise controlling other territories, sometimes through military conquest, sometimes through diplomacy, sometimes through economics. Rome did it with disciplined armies and infrastructure. The Mongols did it with fast-moving cavalry and sheer terror. The British did it with ships, trade, and the occasional polite, "Oh, we'll just be taking this forever." So how do you go from being a small city-state, tribe, or island to being a globe-spanning superpower? Turns out, the recipe hasn't changed much in the past 3,000 years. You need something new that your enemies aren't ready for. For Rome, it was their disciplined legions and flexible battle formations. For the Mongols, it was mounted archery and lightning-fast mobility. For the British, it was naval dominance. Basically, owning the high seas like they had the only key to the ocean. You also can't run an empire without money. That money comes from trade, tribute, or resources. The Spanish Empire mined so much silver from the Americas that it triggered global inflation. That's right. They had the 16th century equivalent of printing too much money. Then you need someone, or a group of someones, who can rally people to the cause. Alexander the Great didn't just fight wars. He convinced his soldiers that they were part of something world-changing. Rome's rise is the underdog story history teachers love to tell. Starting as a little settlement on the Tiber River, they used alliances, wars, and strategic road building to dominate the Italian peninsula. From there, they expanded into the Mediterranean, eventually taking down Carthage in the Punic Wars, basically the ancient world's version of the Lakers versus Celtics rivalry. The real genius of Rome was how they absorbed conquered peoples. They didn't just rule them, they made them Roman, offering citizenship, protection, and shared identity. You weren't just conquered, you were invited to the VIP section of the empire. Then there's the Mongols, the overnight success story of history. Under Genghis Khan, they went from nomadic herders to rulers of the largest contiguous land empire the world had ever seen. They moved so fast it's hard to wrap your head around. Imagine if Canada invaded South America and controlled it in less than a decade. That's the scale we're talking about. And it wasn't just destruction. They created the YAM system, a postal relay network that made communication across Eurasia lightning fast. You could send a message from China to Eastern Europe in days. Amazon Prime can't even guarantee that. When an empire hits its peak, it's not just a political situation, it's a vibe. And that vibe is usually, we're the biggest, richest, most powerful thing on earth, and nothing can stop us. The peak is the moment when the empire's armies aren't constantly scrambling to fight for survival. Trade is humming, cities are bustling, and the citizens, well, at least the citizens in the capital, feel like they got it. Now, the interesting thing about golden ages is that they often feel endless to the people living through them. Nobody at the time says, oh yeah, this is our golden age. Better enjoy it before the decline. No, they assume that this is the new normal. Let's walk through a few golden ages in detail. Rome's golden age is called the Pax Romana, or the Roman Peace, which lasted roughly from 27 BCE to 180 CE. And for a society built on conquering its neighbors, peace didn't mean no wars. It just meant no major ones, threatening the heart of the empire. During this time, Rome was basically the world's ultimate influencer. Their roads connected cities from Britain to Syria, the aqueducts brought fresh water into urban centers like magic, and their architecture, still standing today, 2,000 years later, as if to say, yeah, we were that good. If you were a Roman citizen during this time, life could be sweet. You had access to bustling markets, public baths, amphitheaters for entertainment, and, for the elite, politics that made you feel like you were shaping the destiny of the known world. Modern analogy? It's like living in the US in the 1950s and having Netflix, Amazon Prime, and high-speed trains. A weird combo, but you get the idea. Prosperity and convenience wrapped in the comfort of thinking your country was the center of the world. While Rome was a master of infrastructure, the Abbasid Caliphate hit its golden age in the 8th and 13th centuries and dominated knowledge. Their capital, Baghdad, became the center of learning, science, philosophy. They had a literal place called the House of Wisdom, where scholars translated Greek, Persian, Indian, and other texts into Arabic, preserving ideas that might have been lost forever. Medicine, astronomy, mathematics all made huge leaps forward. This was the era that gave us algebra, advanced surgical techniques, and astronomical charts that could make your high school science teacher cry tears of joy. Imagine Silicon Valley, the Library of Congress, and NASA all rolled into one city, and the coffee was probably better. When we think of the Mongols, We often picture armies thundering across the steppe, but at their peak, under leaders like Genghis Khan's grandson Kublai, they ran the most efficient long-distance trade network in the world. This was the Pax Mongolica, a time when merchants could travel from China to Europe with relative safety because the Mongols had eliminated most of the bandit gangs along the Silk Road. Good ideas and even technology flowed freely. China's gunpowder made its way west, while Persian and Arab advancements in science made their way east. It was globalization before the term even existed. If you ordered something online and tracked it as it moves from factory to ship to warehouse to your front door, you've experienced the baby version of what the Silk Road was like under the Mongols, minus the threat of catching the plague from the delivery guy. At its height, in the late 19th and early 20th century, the British Empire ruled about a quarter of the Earth's land and people. The Industrial Revolution had made Britain the factory of the world. Steamships and railways shrank travel time dramatically, and telegraphs meant you could send a message from London to India in minutes instead of months. It wasn't all rosy, of course. The wealth came from colonies that were often exploited, but from the British perspective, the empire seemed unshakable. In London, this was the age of grand exhibitions showing off technological marvels, literature that spread across the globe, and a sense that Britain was writing the future. Imagine if one country controlled Amazon, Apple, Google, and every major shipping company and decided the rules for international trade. That was Britain at its Golden Age peak. Golden Ages also changed the way people think. Citizens start to believe their empire is destined to last forever. Propaganda, whether it's Roman coins stamped with the emperor's face or British schoolchildren pledging loyalty to the crown, reinforces the idea that decline isn't even possible. And here's the twist. Golden Ages can hide the seeds of their own destruction. The prosperity often depends on complex systems, trade networks, resource flows, political alliances that can unravel quickly if stressed. Think of a Jenga tower. While it's standing tall, you forget that one wrong move can bring the whole thing down. The thing about peaks is there's only one way to go afterward. No matter how high the Golden Age climbs, the descent eventually comes. And history shows us that the fall isn't always caused by outside enemies. Often, it's the empire itself that starts loosening the bricks of its own foundation. The trouble with Golden Ages is nobody thinks they'll end. When you're at the top, it feels like you'll stay there forever. But history is the greatest reminder that forever has an expiration date. Decline doesn't always happen like a meteor strike, sudden and obvious. Sometimes it's slow, like a dripping faucet you ignore until one day the basement's flooded. Other times, it is sudden, a political earthquake or military disaster that shakes the empire apart overnight. Regardless of speed, most collapses follow the same patterns. And here's where things get really interesting. These patterns repeat across cultures, centuries, and continents. Next, I will briefly discuss the four horsemen of imperial collapse. The first is overextension. The empire grows so large that governing it becomes like trying to run a marathon while juggling flaming swords. The Romans learned the hard way. Protecting faraway borders from Britain to Mesopotamia meant huge military costs, slow communication, and endless headaches. By the time orders reached a distant province, the situation had already changed. The second is economic trouble. Armies aren't free. Infrastructure needs maintenance, and those fancy palaces don't pay for themselves. The Spanish Empire mined so much silver from the Americas that it caused massive inflation, the kind of "we're rich" moment that ends with, "Wait, why is bread suddenly 200% more expensive?" The third is internal division. Civil wars, corruption, and infighting are like termites that bore into the foundation. In Rome's later years, emperors were overthrown so often that it became less of a government and more of a political game, a game of musical chairs, except the loser usually got assassinated. The last is external pressure. Rivals notice when you're slipping. They start nibbling at your territory like hyenas testing a wounded lion. For the British Empire, it wasn't one rival, but dozens. Independence movements, trade competition from the US and Germany, and two devastating world wars. So let's take a look at Rome, the Roman Empire's long goodbye. The Roman Empire didn't collapse in a single dramatic battle. It unraveled over centuries. Economic strain came from constant warfare and heavy taxation. Overextension meant the military was always stretched thin, defending multiple frontiers. Political chaos turned to leadership into a revolving door. Between 235 and 284 CE, Rome had over 20 emperors, most meeting violent ends. By the 5th century, the Western Roman Empire was a shadow of its former self. Germanic tribes like the Visigoths and Vandals sacked cities, including Rome itself. In 476 CE, the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed, the symbolic fall of Rome. The eastern half, what we call today the Byzantine Empire, limped along for another 1,000 years, but Rome's glory days were long gone. Imagine if the US government changed presidents every 6 months, all while trying to fight wars on 3 continents and cover the national budget with maxed out credit cards. Next, we'll look at the British Empire, death by 1,000 independence movements. If Rome's decline was a slow bleed, the British Empire's was more like a series of sharp, unavoidable cuts. At its height in 1919, it controlled about a quarter of the globe's population, but the 2 world wars drained its finances and weakened its military dominance. After World War II, independence movements surged. India in 1947, Ghana in 1957, Kenya in 1963, and dozens more in quick succession. Britain still had influence, but the days of "the sun never sets on the British Empire" were over. It's like running a huge multinational company, only your biggest clients, one after another, are lost. You're still in business, but you're no longer the powerhouse you used to be. What about the Mongol Empire? It was too big to hold together. The Mongols rose fast and fell almost as quickly. Genghis Khan's descendants inherited an empire stretching from the Pacific to Eastern Europe, but governing it proved impossible. Communication was fast for the 13th century, but still not enough to manage crises along thousands of miles. Succession disputes between heirs fractured the empire into separate khanates. Within a century, it was no longer one unified power, but a loose collection of regional states. Think of a startup that grows too fast. They dominate the market, open offices everywhere, but can't keep their leadership on the same page. Within a few years, internal squabbles and logistical nightmares send them crashing. Not every empire falls because of military defeat or economic collapse. Sometimes the real danger is complacency. When an empire believes its own hype, it stops adapting, Leaders assume the systems that worked yesterday will still work tomorrow. But technology changes, trade routes shift, and new rivals emerge. Cultural shifts also play a role. As generations pass, the fierce drive that built the empire fades. Citizens who grew up in peace and wealth may not have the same grit as their conquering ancestors. It's hard to be a world-dominating force when your political debates are more about palace renovations than frontier defense. While slow decline is more common, history has its share of instant collapses. Take the Aztec Empire. In just 2 years, Hernán Cortés and his Spanish allies brought down one of the most sophisticated civilizations in the Americas, thanks to steel weapons, smallpox, and alliances with the Aztec enemies. We also have Napoleon's empire, which rose to dominate Europe in a decade, but fell apart after one disastrous Russian winter and a few decisive defeats. These are the empire equivalent of getting T-boned at an intersection. One big shock that flips everything upside down. And here's the plot twist. While we tend to think of empires as relics of the past, the patterns that took down Rome, the Mongols, the British, might quietly work today. We just don't always call them empires anymore. So here's the thing. Most people hear the word empire and think of togas, horse-mounted warriors, or 19th century colonizers with fancy hats. Here's the plot twist. Empires never really went away. They just rebranded. In the 21st century, empire can mean a lot more than just controlling land with armies. Influence today can be measured in markets, data, culture, and technology. You can rule the world without ever planting a flag. You just need everyone to use your product, speak your language, or watch your content. Let's talk about the new players in the imperial game. Some modern countries still operate in very old-school imperial ways, just with subtler tools. Instead of building forts everywhere, they build military bases. Instead of outright conquest, they sign trade agreements and offer loans with strings attached. Instead of forcing you to speak their language, they make you want to, because that's the key to getting ahead in business and culture. The United States has over 750 military bases in about 80 countries. That's more than the British Empire had at its peak. And it gives the U.S. global reach to influence politics, security, and trade. Add in Hollywood, the tech industry, and the U.S. dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, and you've got influence on a scale most historical empires would envy. China has built its own 21st century empire through the Belt and Road Initiative, massive infrastructure projects and trade deals across Asia, Africa, and beyond. They're using ports, railways, and investments to create a web of economic influence, a kind of Silk Road sequel. These modern empires don't necessarily want to rule your land. They want to access your markets, your resources, and your political goodwill, the 21st century version of tribute. If Rome's legions and the Mongols' cavalry were the muscle of old empires, today's equivalent might be algorithms. Amazon controls the global retail flow like the British controlled shipping lanes. If they vanish tomorrow, half of your deliveries, and possibly your cat's food supply, would be in chaos. Google organizes and controls access to knowledge in a way that feels eerily Roman. The roads of the empire connected physical places, while Google's search engine connects information. Apple is basically the Ming dynasty of tech, obsessed with sleek design, controlling its own closed system, and making sure its products are seen as status symbols worldwide. Meta, which includes Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, is a communications empire quietly holding the social connection of billions of people in its hands. Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon. Mark Zuckerberg crossed the 2 billion active users mark. And the kicker? You don't vote for corporate emperors. They're not elected. They're appointed by its shareholders, or in some cases, themselves. Yet they shape your life just as much as laws do. Sometimes the most powerful empire isn't the one with the biggest army or bank account. It's the one that shapes your thoughts, tastes, and values. Think of how American movies, music, and fast food are instantly recognizable almost anywhere in the world, or how K-pop and Korean dramas have put South Korea in the cultural driver's seat for millions of fans globally, or how anime and manga have made Japanese storytelling part of the fabric of youth culture from Sao Paulo to Stockholm. This is soft power, when your culture is so influential that many people voluntarily adopt your language, fashion, and even your worldview. The Roman Empire and Latin and Roman law. The British Empire had English and cricket. The US has Marvel movies and McDonald's. Here's the interesting and truly unsettling part. Modern empires might fall for the same reasons as the old ones. Overextension, expanding too fast in too many markets or regions. C. Companies that go global too quickly and collapse under their own logistics. Economic trouble. A market crash, loss of investor trust, or major trade war can knock an empire-sized company or nation off balance. Internal division. Political polarization, corporate leadership scandals, public backlash. These are the termites in the system. And then we have external pressure. Competitors, rival nations, or disruptive new technologies that suddenly make the old system obsolete. Think about MySpace. Once the Mongol empire of social media. Then Facebook rolled in, and with a few years, MySpace was a ghost town. Or consider Blockbuster, which ruled home video rentals like the British ruled the seas, until Netflix changed the game. In other words, the fall isn't always military defeat. Sometimes it's just a better product or faster idea. If you are living inside an empire, ancient or modern, it's easy to think it'll last forever. But the truth is, every empire looks invincible, right up until it doesn't. And if the patterns of the past hold true, the end usually comes from within just as much from the outside. Maybe the real question is, will modern empires fall? But a better question is, when will they fall and how? And that brings us to the last part of our story, the lessons that we can actually take from thousands of years of rise and fall history. Spoiler alert, they're surprisingly personal. After spending thousands of years building, peaking, and toppling empires, you'd think humanity would have learned a few things by now. Spoiler alert, we haven't. We keep running the same playbook: ambition, expansion, glory, overreach, then decline. Like we're all in some cosmic rerun of history's greatest hits. And here's the frustrating part. The warning signs are always there, but the people inside the empire rarely see them. Or worse, they see them and they shrug. So what should we take away from all of this? Lesson 1. No one stays on top forever. Every empire, no matter how mighty, has a shelf life. Rome lasted centuries. The Mongols had decades. Modern corporations sometimes just have a few years in the sun. The mistake is thinking your empire is the exception. Rome thought its borders would hold forever. The British assumed the sun would never set. MySpace, well, they thought they'd all still be customizing our profile songs in 2025. If you're running something, a country, a business, even your own life, don't confuse momentum with immortality. Lesson 2. Adapt or die. Preferably adapt. The empires that lasted the longest were the ones that adapted to change. Rome adjusted its military tactics for centuries before it finally fell. The Byzantine Empire reinvented itself culturally and militarily to survive long after the Western Empire crumbled. Modern equivalent? Look at Netflix. They pivoted from DVDs to streaming content creation, basically reinventing itself 3 times in under 15 years. That's why they're still here and Blockbuster isn't. The second you stopped adapting, whether you're an emperor or an entrepreneur, the countdown to your decline begins. Lesson 3. Manage your limits before they manage you. Overextension has killed more empires than almost anything else. Rome tried to control too much land. The Mongols spread their rule across too many cultures and climates. Even the Soviet Union collapsed under the weight of trying to compete militarily and economically with half the planet. The same applies on a personal level. If you say yes to every project, every responsibility, every expansion idea, you're basically running your own mini empire into exhaustion. The Romans didn't have the luxury of saying, let's scale back this quarter. You do. Lesson 4. Internal decay is deadlier than enemies. Most empires are brought down more by what's happening inside their borders than outside. Corruption, political polarization, social inequality. These are the termites that hollow out the walls before the first barbarian even shows up. It's the same in our modern lives. Relationships, teams, and companies often fail from internal breakdown long before external competition lands a serious blow. And finally, Lesson 5. Legacy outlasts power. Even after an empire falls, parts of it live on. Languages, legal systems, infrastructure, art, and technology. Rome's roads became Europe's trade routes. The British Empire's language became the world's business standard. The Mongols' trade network paved the way for modern global economy. Your personal empire, your work, your relationships, your projects might not last forever, but pieces of it can. The real question is, what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? Here's where it gets personal. You may not be Julius Caesar or Queen Victoria, but you are running your own little empire. Your time, your energy, your ambitions, and they are your territory. The rise and fall pattern isn't just a history lesson. It's a blueprint for how things in your own life will thrive and crumble. Are you overextended? Are you adapting to change? Are you ignoring the cracks in the foundation? You don't need a legion of soldiers or navy to answer those questions. Just some self-awareness and maybe a calendar. We often treat history like a museum, a place to look at dusty artifacts from far away. But history is more like a mirror. The same human tendencies that built and destroyed empires are alive and well today, in politics, in business, and in our personal lives. Ignoring those lessons isn't just bad history, it's bad strategy. So the next time someone tells you history repeats itself, remember, it's not fate. It's habit. Empires fall because people make the same choices over and over, convinced they'll be the ones to beat the odds. Maybe the real lesson is to stop trying to be invincible and start trying to be adaptable. That's all for today's journey through the rise and fall of empires. If you liked this episode, share it with someone who thinks history is just memorizing dates, and remind them it's actually the longest running drama series ever made. I'm James, and this has been Once Upon Yesterday. Until next time, keep your history close and your empires closer.